On a stormy night, a wounded woman knocks at the sheriff's door. Blood on her hands, a ledger in her arm, and only 2 words on her lips. "Push harder." In that moment, the sheriff knew the town was about to burn. Elias Cade sat alone in his cabin as the storm bore down hard upon the frontier town of Cross Spur. Wind whistled through the gaps in the shutters. Rain lashed against the roof like handfuls of nails, and thunder rolled low across the hills, shaking the timber walls. He had seen a lifetime of such nights, when the sky itself seemed ready to tear apart the earth. A weary sheriff, his badge dulled from years of duty, Cade nursed a glass of whiskey by the fire, listening to the storm breathe heavy through the pines. Then came the knock. It wasn't timid. It was desperate. Rapid pounding rattled the cabin door as if death itself were demanding entry. He froze, hand hovering near the revolver on the table. In the howl of the storm, he heard a woman's voice cry out, strained and ragged, "Push harder!" At first it struck him strange, the cry almost intimate, but the edge in her tone carried something else, fear. He rose, chair scraping against the floorboards, and moved to the door. When he pulled it open, a blast of cold rain slapped him in the face. If you're ready for a Western tale of betrayal, blood, and justice, make sure to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. A woman staggered inside. Her shawl was soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. Blood trailed from a gash in her arm, dripping steadily onto the floorboards. She clutched a weather-beaten ledger to her chest, her eyes wide and burning with panic. "They'll burn me alive if I don't hand this over," she whispered, collapsing against the table. Cade grabbed her before she fell, lowering her gently into a chair. He studied her quickly. Mexican heritage, skin browned from the sun, hands calloused but trembling, grief etched deep into her face. "Who are you?" His voice came out low and steady. "Angel Mercado," she said, sucking in sharp breaths. "My husband?" "He was with the railway. He kept their accounts. He found what they were doing, the money they stole. They killed him for it." Her hand shook as she dropped the ledger onto the table, the leather soaked from the rain. Pages fanned open to reveal names scrawled in ink, familiar names. Cade felt the weight in his gut tighten. Half the town's leaders, men who strutted into church on Sunday and drank with him at the saloon on Saturday, were listed with figures beside their names. Stolen funds. Fraud on a scale that could cripple the territory. Thunder rattled the windows. "The cabin seems smaller all of a sudden." "They'll come for me," Angel gasped. "They'll come tonight." Cade's eyes lifted from the ledger to her. There was no doubting the fear in her face. He reached slowly for his revolver, fingers brushing the iron grip. "Angel," he muttered, voice like gravel. "You just dragged the devil to my doorstep." Outside, the storm grew louder. Hoofbeats squelched in the mud, heavy boots crunching closer. A shadow passed by the window, broad shoulders, wide hat. Angel stiffened. Cade rose, gun in hand, moving silently toward the door. The fire popped in the hearth, filling the silence between thunderclaps. The handle on the cabin door turned, slow and deliberate, as if whoever stood outside already knew what waited within. Cade shoved the ledger shut, his mind racing. He caught Angel's wrist, rough but steady, and pulled her toward the hearth. "Down there," he muttered. She looked confused until he kicked aside the loose plank he'd pried years ago for hiding whiskey and ammunition. Beneath lay a shallow crawl space dark as a grave. She hesitated, breath trembling. "They'll hear me breathe," she whispered. "Then don't," Cade said, lowering her in, replacing the plank, and dragging a rug across it just as the door swung open. 3 masked riders stormed inside, rainwater dripping off their coats, spurs clanking on the wooden floor. The one in front had the arrogance of ownership in his stance. Even through the mask, Cade knew him, Cullen Price. The cattle baron carried himself like the land belonged to him, and most days it did. "You seen her?" Price's voice was smooth, dangerous, like a knife wrapped in velvet. Cade stood calm, revolver holstered but hand not far from it. "Seen plenty tonight? Storm'll drive a horse mad. Haven't seen who you're chasing. Price's eyes swept the cabin, pausing on the wet floorboards, the second chair by the table. He stepped closer, the others fanning out, their boots dragging mud across Cade's floor. With a sudden laugh, Price snatched a lantern from the wall and hurled it into the boards. Fire licked upward, embers popping. Cade grabbed a blanket and smothered it quick. Smoke curling in his lungs. If this story's got your heart racing, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gripping Western dramas every week. If you do find her, Price said through the haze, push harder to keep her, 'cause we'll be driving this whole town wilder than midnight fire. His men chuckled low, then stormed back out, leaving the cabin door yawning open to the storm. Cade crouched, tore the rug back, and pulled up the plank. Angel gasped, gulping air like she'd been buried alive. Her eyes were wide, not from the smoke, but from what Price's words stirred in her. "That man," she said, clutching her wound. "He's the reason my husband's in the ground." Miguel kept the accounts for the railway, found what Price was stealing. Millions in land rights, rail contracts, bribes. Miguel wrote it down. Said the truth had to live somewhere. Price slit his throat and made it look like bandits. Her voice cracked, but steel shone through. "I swore I'd finish what he started." Cade stared at her, rain hissing on the roof, smoke still coiling upward. His brother's face rose in memory. Jacob, bleeding in the dirt after an ambush years back, clutching Cade's hand, whispering with his last breath, "Protect the innocent," no matter the weight. The ledger on the table seemed heavier than iron. In his chest, the oath burned again, fresh as the night it was spoken. Then a sound pierced the storm. Not thunder, not wind, bells. The church bell of Cross Spur, tolling at an hour it had no business ringing. One long peal, then another. A signal. Angel's face drained of color. "They're spreading," she whispered. "Hunters in every street." Cade moved to the door, eyes narrowing into the storm-swept dark, knowing the night was only beginning. The first gray light of dawn spilled over Cross Spur, washing the muddy streets in pale silver. Smoke from chimney stacks curled against the fading storm clouds, and the town stirred with the weary shuffle of men heading to the livery, women sweeping porches slick from rain. Sheriff Elias Cade walked with his collar turned up, Angel at his side, the damp ledger tucked beneath his arm. His boots sank deep in the mud, every step heavy with the decision he was about to make. The courthouse loomed at the end of Main Street, its wooden frame tall and proud but weathered, like everything else in the territory. Inside, Judge Holbrook waited in his office, a man wrapped in fine clothes and the illusion of law. His hair was thin, combed flat, his desk polished though the floorboards cracked around it. He looked up from a glass of brandy when Cade entered, Angel trailing close behind with wary eyes. Cade laid the ledger on the desk. "This came to me last night. Names, figures, stolen funds, tied to Cullen Price and his men. Angel's husband died for writing it. She barely made it out alive." Holbrook leaned forward, long fingers stroking the cracked leather. His brow furrowed in what looked like concern, but his eyes were cold, still as a snake's. "This is troubling, Sheriff. But you can't bring this before a court with nothing more than the words of a widow. Price owns half the jury pool. Folks will turn on you before they turn on him." Angel's voice cut sharp through the air. "Truth don't need a country judge, only courage to speak it." The judge's lips twitched into a smile, but it never touched his eyes. "Courage is a fine word, Mrs. Mercado, but proof is finer. Without more, this ledger is ink on paper, and you'll both hang for it before it ever sways a jury." Cade caught the shift in the man's gaze, the quick flicker, the tightening of his jaw. It was the look of a man not surprised but cornered, complicit. "We'll take it to Carson Bluffs," Angel said firmly, ignoring the way Holbrook's stare turned colder. "The railway office keeps the records. They'll see what Miguel found, and they'll back it with their seal." Cade's jaw tightened. Carson Bluffs was 2 days' hard ride. Every trail cut straight through Price's grazing lands. It would be like walking into a wolf den with blood on your hands. Still, he knew she was right. When they stepped back into the morning light, the town was already awake enough to notice. Whispers spread through the air like smoke. A drunk leaning against the saloon door spat at the mud near their boots. "Sheriff's siding with a foreign widow now," he slurred. Others watched from windows, some curious, some with that same wary fear he'd seen in men who'd long since given up on justice. Halbrook's cold gaze fixed on Cade. "The law demands proof, Sheriff. Do you have any?" Price barked a laugh. "All they've got is ash, Judge. I burned their lies myself." One of Price's men stepped forward, yanking Angel off her feet, dragging her into the dirt. "Search her," Price ordered. "Let the people see she hides nothing but cowardice." Her boot was ripped away, and the crowd gasped as something small and brass tumbled into the dust, catching the morning light. The railway badge rolled once before lying flat. Its hinge snapped open from the fall. Inside, folded and dry, was the hidden parchment, the duplicate ledger. Gasps rippled outward like a wave breaking over the gathered townsfolk. Murmurs turned to shouts. The blacksmith stepped forward, voice booming. "That's a railway seal. That's no forgery!" Angel, breathing hard, cried out, her voice raw with both fury and grief. "My husband's blood is in those numbers. He died to keep the truth alive, and Price put him in the ground." The murmurs swelled. "She speaks truth," shouted the blacksmith. Others began to nod, whispering fiercely, anger stirring like kindling catching flame. Price's face darkened, rage burning through his mask of charm. He opened his mouth to roar, but Cade struck first. With a sudden lunge, he swung his shackles upward, the iron links smashing across Price's face. Blood burst from the Baron's lip as he staggered back, cursing. The crowd erupted, some rushing to aid Price, others breaking toward Cade, fists raised, lines of loyalty and fear snapping in an instant. Chaos broke like a storm over the square. The deputy was dragged into the fray, his rifle wrenched away by a townsman. Fists and boots flew. A woman hurled a rock that split one of Price's riders across the temple. The blacksmith seized a hammer from his belt and swung it with deadly intent. Cade wrestled free from the man holding his chains, shoving Angel behind him, scanning for Price through the melee. The Baron fought like a cornered wolf, his eyes blazing with hate, and then, above it all, a pistol cracked into the air. The sound froze the mob mid-motion. Judge Halbrook stood on the courthouse steps, pistol steady in his hand. His thin mouth was a hard line, his eyes glinting with something sharp and long hidden. But the barrel of his pistol wasn't aimed at Cade. It was aimed straight at Cullen Price. The courthouse square hung still for a heartbeat. Judge Halbrook's pistol leveled at Cullen Price. The townsfolk caught in the breath between fear and fury. Price's eyes narrowed, a smile flickering as if he'd known this betrayal would come. And then the street erupted in thunder. Price drew and fired before Halbrook could squeeze his trigger. The judge jerked backward, the shot tearing through his chest, blood blooming across his robes as he tumbled down the courthouse steps. The crowd screamed, scattering as another shot rang out, townsfolk diving for cover. Cade tore himself free of the half-broken chains and lunged for Price, the two colliding in a storm of fists and fury. They grappled, crashing into barrels, rolling in the mud as firelight from overturned torches spilled across the street. Price fought with a savage strength, snarling curses, his hand clawing for the pistol at his belt. Cade slammed his forearm against his throat, growling through clenched teeth. "This town ain't yours to burn." Meanwhile, Angel stumbled to her feet, her face streaked with blood and soot. She turned on the crowd, her voice fierce, carrying over the chaos. "Stand, damn you! Don't let him own your fear. My husband died for truth. Will you live as cowards or rise as free men?" Her words struck deep. The blacksmith raised his hammer high and roared, charging one of Price's riders. Others followed, fists and tools swinging, the air alive with the clash of rebellion. Cade and Price slammed through the saloon doors, the fight spilling inside. They smashed into tables, sending glasses shattering, liquor soaking into the floorboards. A lantern toppled, flame licking across spilled whiskey. Another lantern fell, then another, until fire spread in greedy tongues up the walls, turning the saloon into a furnace. The two men fought in the choking smoke and rising heat. Cade drove Price back against a support beam, the wood already burning, cracking under the weight of the fire. With a roar, Cade heaved, pinning Price beneath a collapsing beam that crashed down, flames devouring it. Price writhed, trapped, his face lit by firelight. His voice rasped through the smoke. "You'll never be rid of me, Sheriff. Men like me, this land needs us. You can't burn me out." Cade's eyes were cold as stone. He turned toward Angel, who had followed into the inferno, clutching the railway badge in her hand. His voice was low, steady. "Angel, drive him!" Her eyes glistened, but her hand was sure. She stepped forward, holding the badge aloft one last time. The names, the proof, the weight of her husband's sacrifice, everything was there. And then she thrust it into the flames. The fire roared higher as brass melted and parchment curled into ash. Price's eyes widened in horror, not at the proof destroyed, but at the realization that it no longer mattered. The town had seen. The truth was already in the open, etched not in paper, but in the hearts of those who had finally risen. The crowd gathered outside as the saloon burned, watching through smoke and flame as Cullen Price screamed, pinned beneath the wreckage. His cries were swallowed by the blaze, until only the roar of fire filled the night. By dawn, Cross Spur stood in silence. The saloon was nothing but smoldering ruin, black beams jutting against the pale sky, smoke curling heavenward. Angel stood at Cade's side, her face scarred by soot and sweat, her eyes unbroken. She touched his arm, voice steady despite the tremor in it. "We pushed harder," she whispered. "We drove wilder than midnight fire. And we're still standing." Weeks passed, and the ashes of the Cross Spur saloon settled into memory. The town moved like a body wounded but still alive, scarred but breathing. Where there had once been fear, now there was the sound of hammers striking nails, voices raised not in whispers but in work. New boards went up over charred foundations, new paint stretched across weary storefronts. The people who had stood silent for so long began to look one another in the eye again. Angel was no longer a shadow moving at the edges of the street. She walked openly now, sleeves rolled as she helped lift beams, mend roofs, pass bread to the hungry. Some still looked at her with unease, but most tipped their hats or pressed her hand in thanks. Children followed her, carrying tools or laughing as she told them stories of her husband, Miguel. She kept her head high, her grief worn openly, but with it came a quiet strength that drew others near. At the railway depot, masons carved fresh stone, setting it deep into the foundation. The name Miguel Mercado gleamed in sharp letters beneath the words, "For truth, for justice." Angel stood with tears in her eyes as the veil of dust fell away from the chiseled stone. Her hand touched it gently, like she was touching him once more, and she smiled through her sorrow. For the first time in years, she was not alone. On the edge of town, Elias Cade sat tall in the saddle, the morning light painting the hills in gold. His eyes were heavy with the years, with everything he had seen and carried, but his soul felt lighter. The weight of failure, of his brother's dying plea, had been lifted in fire and blood. He had done what he swore, even at the cost of his own peace. He guided his horse toward the ridge, pausing as Angel turned to see him go. Their eyes met across the distance. He tipped his hat in silence. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering words he read on her lips as clear as if she stood beside him. "Thank you, Sheriff." "My husband rests." Cade nudged his horse forward. The town shrank behind him, voices fading until only the wind remained. He rode into the horizon, where the land stretched endless, where law and justice were still battles waiting to be fought. And as the narration closed over the land, it spoke like wind across the plains. On a frontier where law was bought and truth was buried, one man's choice lit a fire no water could drown. The final image lingered, smoke rising from the ruins of the saloon, curling soft against the morning sky, blending into the light of a new day. If you believe justice can still burn brighter than greed, then like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to ride with us for the next story. Angel didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, eyes burning with a defiance that drew silence from the gawkers. "Truth don't need a country," she said again. Her voice carrying down the street like a bell, the moment hung in the air, fragile as glass, until a crack shattered it. A gunshot rang out. The bullet hissed past Angel's head so close it cut a lock of her hair, then slammed into the ledger she held, clutched against her chest. Pages tore with a violent snap. She stumbled back into Cade's arms as the crowd gasped, and smoke curled from a rooftop down the street. Someone was hunting, and they had just drawn blood. The horses thundered out of Cross Spur in a spray of mud, hooves pounding a desperate rhythm across the open prairie. Dawn had broken fully now, the storm spent, leaving a harsh sun climbing over the horizon. It burned white-hot against the wide sky, turning the land into an endless stretch of dust and heat. Sheriff Elias Cade leaned low over the saddle, urging his horse faster, Angel clutching her reins beside him, her shawl snapping like a tattered flag in the wind. The prairie stretched flat in every direction, unforgiving and exposed. Dust swirled up around them, coating their throats, stinging their eyes. Angel rode hard, her jaw set, but the wound on her arm split open anew, dark blood soaking down her sleeve until it dripped off her fingers. She bit back a cry, keeping her horse steady, refusing to falter. Behind them came the sound of hell unleashed. Cullen Price's riders poured over the rise, their whoops cutting the morning air, rifles cracking wild shots that kicked up dirt near the horses' hooves. Lead sang past them, sharp and hungry. One rider broke from the pack, spurring faster, close enough for Cade to hear the slap of his reins and the rasp of his breath. Cade turned in the saddle, iron steady in his hand. His colt barked once, the shot clean and final. The rider jerked back, eyes wide, before tumbling from the saddle in a lifeless sprawl, dust swallowing him whole. Angel's breath came sharp, her face pale but burning with fire. "How far you willing to go, Sheriff?" she gasped. Cade's gaze didn't waver from the horizon, voice cold as stone. "All the way." The words hung in the dry air as if sealed by the sun itself. And then the land betrayed them. On the ridge ahead, 5 more riders crested the rise, silhouettes dark against the blazing sky, rifles glinting in the light. They spread wide, cutting off every path forward. The chase had only begun. The prairie fell away into broken ground, and then the sound reached them, a deep, endless roar carried on the wind. Cade reined his horse hard, but there was no stopping the truth that rose before them. The river lay swollen and furious, swollen from the storm the night before. Its waters surged brown and violent, smashing against black rocks, pulling whole tree limbs under as if they were twigs. The only way forward was across. Behind them came the thunder of hooves. Cullen Price's riders closed in fast, their laughter sharp, their gunfire cracking across the distance. Bullets hissed over the water, throwing up sharp sprays where they struck. The ridgemen they'd seen earlier were driving them toward this choke point, boxing them in tight against the current. Angel's chest heaved, her eyes locked on the river. "We can't make it," she said, voice tight with both fear and certainty. Her hand clutched the ledger against her chest, blood still dripping down her sleeve. Cade's eyes never left the torrent. His jaw was clenched, his face set with the weariness of a man who'd lived too long on choices no man should make. "Other way is worse," he muttered. Behind them, a voice bellowed across the distance. Price himself, riding tall, his coat snapping in the wind. "Hand her over, Sheriff. Hand the ledger, and maybe we let you breathe another day." Angel shook her head violently, turning to Cade with a fire in her eyes that no flood could put out. "No, don't you dare! Let it take me." She pressed the ledger against his chest. "But don't let them have this." Cade stared at her, and for a moment the river's roar faded beneath another sound, one that lived only in memory. His brother Jacob's voice, ragged and dying in the dirt, clutching his hand with the last of his strength. Protect the innocent no matter the weight. He had failed once. He would not again. He swung down, tied Angel's body firm to the saddle, though she fought him. "You ride, Angel. Horse'll fight the current better than we will." Her eyes widened, tears cutting through the dust on her face. "Elias," he cut her off, slapping the horse hard on the flank. With a scream and a lunge, it bolted straight into the river, carrying them both. The current struck like a wall, lifting horse and riders, dragging them sideways into the flood. Cade's hands grabbed for Angel as the water tore them apart. The ledger slipped, pages snapping like wings before the current swallowed them. Angel's scream ripped through the storm of sound as her fingers brushed his, then slipped away, the river claiming them both. Cold, crushing darkness surged in, swallowing breath, swallowing light, swallowing the question of whether they lived or died. They washed ashore like corpses dragged from the underworld. The river spat them out onto a gravel bank beneath a stand of cottonwoods, coughing, gasping, their bodies battered and cold. The horse was gone. The ledger clutched against Angel's chest, torn and waterlogged, its ink smeared into black veins across ruined pages. Elias Cade lay on his back, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the rising dawn sky. For a long while, they could do nothing but breathe. Angel stirred first, shivering, her lips blue but her gaze steady. She pulled the sodden ledger open, her hands trembling as she turned the ruined pages. "It's gone," she whispered. Everything Miguel wrote. Everything he died for. Cade pushed himself upright, wiping river water from his eyes. Maybe not. She looked at him, desperate. And then, almost as if remembering a secret she'd buried so deep it was painful, her hand drifted to her boot. She pulled it off, shaking out the soaked leather, and there in her palm lay a small brass railway badge, dull from wear. She turned it over, pressed at the back, and a hidden seam gave way. Inside was a folded strip of parchment, the ink preserved, names and figures clear as day. "Miguel knew they'd come for him," she said, her voice breaking. "He made a duplicate. Hid it where only I'd think to look." Cade's eyes narrowed. The badge gleamed faintly in the thin light. Proof, real proof. Something Price could never wash away. He took it gently, weighing its worth against every bullet in every gun that would now be hunting them. By nightfall, they'd built a small campfire under the cottonwoods, smoke curling into the dark sky. Angel warmed her hands over the flames, though her arm bled again beneath the bandage Cade had tied. The ruined ledger lay on a log nearby, its pages spread like wings, bait ready to be taken. Cade listened hard to the night. The wind carried more than the rustle of leaves. In the distance, faint glimmers moved on the ridges, torchlight, scattered like fireflies. Price's men were closing in, fanning across the hills. He stood, eyes narrowing, and dragged the ruined ledger into the center of the clearing. Then he pressed the badge back into Angel's boot, tightening the strap with his own calloused hands. "That stays hidden. Don't let them touch it." She looked at him silent, then nodded once. The hours passed heavy and long. Coyotes cried in the distance, owls hooted low, and the torchlights drew nearer, circling. By dawn, the fire had burned low, and with it came Cullen Price himself. He rode into the clearing on a tall bay stallion, dressed in black like he was headed for his own funeral, his men fanning out behind him. He swung down with the slow confidence of a man who thought the land itself bent beneath his boots. His eyes swept Cade and Angel, lingering on the ruined ledger left in the open. "Push harder, Sheriff," he drawled, picking it up, dripping with disdain. "Let's see how long before your little angel breaks." Angel's body stiffened, her breath sharp. Cade's hand brushed her arm, his voice low as gravel. "He doesn't know." Price struck a match on his boot heel, touched it to the ledger, and watched the fire climb. Pages curled, blackening, the smoke twisting into the morning air. Angel trembled, watching her husband's work turn to ash. Cade forced himself to hold still, to keep his face stone. Proof was safe. The badge was safe. Price believed he'd won, but then came the sound that froze Cade's blood. Behind him, a rifle clicked. Slow, deliberate. The hammer drawn back with an awful finality. A familiar voice followed, hard and bitter. "Sorry, Sheriff. Time to pick the right side." It was his own deputy. The chains bit deep into Cade's wrists as he stumbled down the muddy street, Angel at his side with her own shackles clamped cruelly tight. The deputy marched them forward at rifle point, Cullen Price riding tall in the saddle just ahead, his grin wide enough to split his face. The townsfolk gathered as they always did when spectacle came to Cross Spur, peering from porches and saloon doors, whispering as the prisoners were dragged toward the courthouse steps. The morning sun lit the scene with no mercy, washing every face in harsh light. Judge Halbrook stood waiting, robes draped across his shoulders, his thin lips pressed into a shape of feigned authority. Price dismounted, boots striking the mud, and raised his voice for all to hear. "You see before you," he called out, sweeping a hand toward Cade and Angel, "a traitor sheriff and a lying foreign widow. Thieves of the truth, conspirators against law and order," the crowd murmured. Some shifted uneasily, others sneered. A woman clutched her child closer. The blacksmith, arms folded, glared from beneath his soot-darkened brow.